Hey there, space people. Welcome to the show. This week I've got a quick episode for you. I've been traveling a lot, so I haven't had much time to do a lot of writing or really pull some thoughts, but I've definitely had a lot on my mind recently, especially around taking care of yourself and taking care of your own mental health and keeping yourself sharp in this crazy age that demands so much of your attention. That's kind of what I want to spend this week talking about. So let me know what you think. Feel free to reach out on Twitter at Today in Space, at AG3D Printing, my personal Twitter at El Greco, ELGR3, the number CO, and we can chat there. You can email me at Today in Space Podcast. Reach out. Would love to hear from you. Love to hear what you think about the new format, about us going weekly, what you like, what you don't like. Constructive feedback is always welcome. So, without further ado, let's start this episode and get into this week's segment of The Balance. Personal log, Earth date, August 11th, 2019. Today in Space. Going back to the balance, we talked about it early on at the beginning of the year. We had the balance of SpaceX and NASA and how, each one uses a different version of science and engineering and I guess theory and practice, theory for NASA, practice for SpaceX, and how it's not that either one is better, it's that you need a combination of the two to really be successful. And everyone has their own percentage of each that is actually what they need. For instance, how many hours of sleep do you really need, right? Some people are good on 6, 5, other people definitely need 8, or 10. They just can't function without it, right? So right now, I think for me, the balance is always because this is something that I love and it's something I'm passionate about and it's something that I'm willing to work extra hours for into the night. My balance is pulling back from fifth gear and going in third gear and kind of coasting a little bit so that I don't burn myself out. So the passion is there. That's not the issue. It's keeping myself healthy, keeping myself in a point where I am consistent and I'm getting things done and I'm not letting the stress of the world get to me. Those are kind of like my qualifiers of when I'm doing things right. I'm being very mindful. I'm writing in my notebook every day. I'm keeping a list of the tasks that I have to do so that I can get them done, choose the most important ones first, get after those. And, it slips. We're human. This isn't a perfect thing. This is something I've been working on for a very long time now at this point, which is kind of crazy. Pretty much as long as this podcast has been out, maybe even a little bit longer, I was really starting to at least write 3 things down every day. And those 3 things were things I had to get done. And when I first started, they weren't really the most beneficial things that I had to get done. They were the things I thought were the most beneficial. And, over time, after you do 3 every day, you start saying, okay, well, I got those done really, really quickly. That was the same, actually, in the early days of the podcast. It was a very, very similar thing where I was setting goals for myself that I thought would take 6 months to achieve. And then as soon as I put it down on paper and it was something that I wanted to achieve, I achieved it way faster than I actually thought I could. So that was, oh man, what year was that? That must have been 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3 years ago. In the early days, I used to have this worksheet for the podcast of things that I was going to talk about. I would check off segments and I'd write them down. I would do mind maps where I would show how I wanted the podcast to flow and go through and talk on the talking points and tell a story. And that was great. And so it's the incremental things. It's, right now where I'm at, I have been traveling a lot for my other job, and I have been also traveling to see people that I love, to traveling up. Recently, I was in Maine. The week before, I was in Texas. So, I haven't talked a lot about this on the podcast, but I have a good amount of physical injuries that I deal with, and some other things too. So, there's the mental aspect that I talk a lot about on the show. I don't really talk about the physical aspect, number one, because talking about it never seems to help. It's just something I think about, and then I think about the pain, and I think about, dealing with chronic pain, and really the mental, and that's when I talked about this the last time we talked about mental discipline. It was that, though, I think it was the Apollo 50th. I think I did a short thing on that about how mental discipline is really was the big marker for me that I got past. It was a big plateau in my personal development that I got past, where I realized, wow, a lot of the chronic pain that I do deal with is really related to me being able to think about it. So that same passion and that obsession that we talked about at the beginning that I have to pull myself back, it's a double-edged sword, because then I can start focusing on the pain, and then that makes it even come up more. And knowing myself, painkillers are not an option. I have an addictive personality. I know that about myself. So I just need to learn how to deal with it. I do a lot of stretching, a lot of yoga, and I eat really, really well. That's probably the thing that has changed my life. I mean, you've seen, if you're following the podcast for a while, especially the visual stuff on YouTube, you'll notice from like the beginning, from when we first started, I definitely lost weight and I look better. And that's a huge part of that is because I eat food that I cook. I cook every meal. I also have some dietary issues. So things that I'm working on, that's another thing, is taking care of yourself. Like you coming from someone that has to, take that extra step, that extra discipline to plan things out. And look, I'm not complaining. I feel great. And I eat better than most people that I know. So this is not a complaining thing. This is more of, these personal logs. I want to start talking about the things that I go through, because I think they're going to be useful to some people. And then at the same time, we can kind of start a discussion about things like mental health. Like with all the things that are going on, there's even just on a personal level what everyone can do. The amount of attention that gets grabbed from us every day, from our phones, from our, from if you have kids, your children, life, family, all of that stuff. And then it's amped up because we have technology. And if you choose to be on social media, if you're listening to this, you probably already know this. I ping on your phone whenever there's a new episode. If you're on the podcast app, same thing on the YouTube channel. So it's about balancing that, and I've really come to find a good balance. And again, that's now. It's a good balance for right now. And that's another thing that I hope you take away from the stuff that we talk about. You can always pick yourself back up. You can always start back up. And the things you change now could not be things that make a difference later. So we evolve. We get better. I mean, we see that with the space program. Like, great, Apollo, we got to the moon. We did that rush to go actually get on the surface of the moon and do something impossible. But then, not even that long afterwards, we literally, the next program, we dismantled our own ability to go to the moon to then do something else. And things change. Things change, and what you're doing now may not be good for later, but it's good for now. And finding that balance and eating well so that your body feels good, you don't feel sore, you don't feel that haze, a sugar rush, at the end of the day. And if you do want to make those changes, do them in small bits. Do them in small, little, tiny bits. I used to smoke cigarettes, pack a day. I was hopelessly addicted. Was what I would write in my journals as I was trying to get myself out of that. It's little bits. I didn't quit cigarettes, overnight. It took many, many tries, and then when the last try finally came, it took a lot of discipline to get yourself out of that. So from the very extreme case to the very tiny case of just like, hey, I'd like to eat better. Do it in tiny doses. That's definitely the way to go. So that's it, guys. I hope this was at least useful. I hope you're doing well. We're going to have more space science coming up this week. If you want to follow along and you want to see what's new in the space industry, you can check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Today in Space Pod. You can check us out at our Facebook page, Today in Space Podcast. All those places, we're really, really active, and we're putting out at least something new. We're actually talking about what's happening today in space. There should be at least a few bits of content every day that's coming out there. We're showcasing clips from the last week's episode. Like, for instance, last week's episode, we did a whole episode on orbital news, and we have 3 clips from that. So we talk about SpaceX and the Starship Hopper tests. They've got a new one coming up soon. We talked about CRS-18 and a bio 3D printer that's going to start the early days of 3D printing organs in space. And then LightSail 2 was successful. We talk about that. First spacecraft to ever be powered by solar pressure. So literally just, riding like the winds of the Earth, like we travel the ocean with sails. It's traveling space with the sails for the sun and the pressure and the radiation that comes off the sun, the solar wind, if you will. We're sailing on the solar wind. You got an update on that, what happened there, what's next. And we also talked about India's moon mission to, the moon surface, Chandrayaan-2, the lunar orbiter, lander, and rover. So all those clips in last week's episode. You can watch the whole thing if you go back, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts right now. On YouTube, we've got all those clips and the full episode. That's about it. Also, we're always talking about futuristic stuff here, and the other big thing that we talk about for futuristic tech is 3D printing. We have a 3D printing workshop where we showcase what's possible with 3D printing, through our own ideas. We make props for the show here. Here's a cube set that we showed last episode too. And not only are we showing you at Instagram and on Twitter at AG3D Printing, we're showing you what's possible. We're also, if you're interested in learning about 3D printing, we've done a few episodes on our YouTube channel at AG3D Printing, where we show you how to 3D print, and we show you how we do certain things like bonding together. We did a Jon Snow sword in different pieces, and we bonded it together. It didn't actually work as well as I wanted to do, especially if you're going to actually swing it around like a sword. And so we're going to take another crack at that and use a totally different technique. But that's what we're doing. It's an idea workshop. Basically, I'm sharing the projects that I'm already making. And on top of that, if you want to get something 3D printed, we have a 3D printing workshop. Pretty much the sky's the limit as far as plastics are concerned, as far as prototypes are concerned, as far as like, hey, this company doesn't make this part anymore, but I still have one and we want to redesign it so that way we have some spares, because let's just say the oven. The oven works really well, but we need new knobs for the oven. All of that stuff we can do, including fun stuff for yourself or for friends, for presents. You can go check us out at ag3d-printing.com. That's our website. You can check us out for a quote there. You can see what other stuff we've done, so you can see what's possible. And that's it. I hope you have a great week. As always, thank you for joining us. And don't forget to spread love and spread science. Be good to yourself. And we'll be back for another episode next week. See you later.